The night was cold. The city around her was broken and silent, filled with smoke and dust. Buildings that once stood tall were now nothing but skeletons of stone and steel. The alien girl walked barefoot through the ruins, her steps slow, her body weak. Her clothes were torn, and her hands shook as she held them close to her chest. She had no family left. She had no friends left. She had no home left. Her eyes, large and shining in the dark, searched every shadow. Every sound made her flinch. Somewhere far away, she could still hear the echoes of war, gunfire, explosions, and the cries of those who never made it out. But here, in this part of the city, there was only silence. Silence so deep, it pressed on her ears. She was hungry. She was thirsty. Her people were gone, scattered or killed. She was the last one, or at least it felt that way. The world she knew had ended. Now, she was only a small figure moving through ruins, too weak to fight, too weak to run. Her stomach growled, but there was no food. She picked up a broken piece of fruit from the ground, but it was covered in ash and dust. She dropped it quickly. Her throat burned with thirst. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She had cried too much already. The girl remembered her mother's voice, soft and warm, telling her to stay strong. She remembered her father's arms, carrying her when she was small. Both were gone now, taken in the fire that had swept across their home. She remembered their faces, and the pain made her chest ache. She stumbled over a piece of rubble and fell to her knees. The stones cut into her skin, but she did not scream. She had no strength left for that. She sat there, shaking, and looked up at the empty sky. The stars were hidden by smoke. The moon was only a faint blur. In that moment, she felt smaller than ever. A tiny spark in a world that had burned too much. She thought of Belen. But closing her eyes and never waking up. Maybe it would be easier. Maybe it would be peaceful. But then, she heard it. A sound. Heavy footsteps, slow, steady, and close. Her heart jumped in her chest. She froze, her body tense. Her eyes darted to the shadows between the broken walls. Someone was there. Someone was watching. Her mind raced. Was it the enemy? The same soldiers who had destroyed her home? If they found her, they would kill her without a second thought. Or worse. She pressed her body against the wall, trying to make herself small, invisible. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She could hear the scrape of boots against stone, the sound of breathing, low and heavy. Whoever it was, they were strong, too strong for her to fight. Her breath came quick and shallow. She looked around for a weapon, but there was nothing. Just broken stones and twisted metal. Her hand shook as she picked up a shard of glass. It was small, useless, but it was all she had. If they came close, she would fight. She would not go quietly. The shadow moved. A tall figure stepped into the faint light of the ruined street. It was not like her people. The body was broader, taller. The face was different. It was a human. Her people had always spoken of humans in whispers. Dangerous, unpredictable, strong. Some said they were monsters in flesh. Others said they were survivors, refusing to die no matter what the galaxy threw at them. She had never seen one this close before. The human's face was hard, lined with pain and scars. His clothes were torn, his arms strong but tired. He looked like someone who had fought too many battles. The girl's grip on the glass tightened. She wanted to run, but her legs were too weak. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. All she could do was stare at him. The human stopped a few steps away. He did not raise a weapon. He did not speak. He only looked at her. The silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Her heart pounded. She thought, this is it. This is how it ends. The human's eyes softened. For a moment, he looked less like a soldier and more like someone who understood her pain. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. No one cared, not anymore. Her vision blurred. Her body swayed. She had not eaten, not slept, not rested in days. The strength drained out of her. The shard of glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the ground. She fell forward, too weak to stand. As she closed her eyes, she felt strong arms catch her before she hit the ground. And then, darkness. She woke slowly as if rising from deep water. Her body ached and her head felt heavy. For a moment, she thought she was still lying on the cold street, waiting for the end. But she was not on the ground. She was being carried. Her eyes fluttered open. Strong arms held her close against a broad chest. The smell of dust, metal, and something faintly human filled her nose. She blinked and looked up. It was him. The human. The same figure who had stepped out of the shadows. The same stranger she had feared would kill her. Yet now, he was carrying her gently, as if she weighed nothing, as if she was something fragile. Her heart raced. She tried to push away, but her arms were weak and her body did not obey. She only managed a faint movement. "Let me go," she whispered in her own tongue. Her voice cracked, too soft, almost lost in the night. The human glanced down at her. His face was rough, marked with scars, but his eyes held no anger. They were tired, yes, very tired, but not cruel. He said something in his language, low and steady. She did not understand the words, but the tone was calm. She shook her head, confused and afraid. Why was he helping her? What did he want? No one gave kindness for free, not anymore. The human kept walking, carrying her through the ruins. His boots crunched on stone and glass. He moved with care, avoiding loud noises, as if he knew others were hunting nearby. His grip around her was firm but not harsh. He could have dropped her, but he didn't. The girl studied his face again, the lines, the scars, the set of his jaw. This was not a man untouched by suffering. He had seen war. He had lost things, maybe even more than she had. For a moment, she thought she saw the same emptiness in his eyes that she carried in her heart. She tried again to speak, this time in broken human words she had heard long ago. "Why? Help? Me?" The human looked at her, surprised she could say even that. His mouth opened, but no clear answer came. Finally, he only said, "Safe." He pressed one hand against his chest and repeated, "Safe. Safe." The word felt strange. Could there be such a thing in this ruined world? The girl wanted to believe him, but fear was stronger. Her people had always said humans were dangerous, wild, quick to anger, quick to destroy. But this man, he was carrying her as though she mattered. Her eyes grew heavy again. The rhythm of his steps and the warmth of his body made her drift towards sleep. But then she remembered the soldiers, the ones who had burned her home. They could still be near. If they found her with a human, what would they do? Her body tensed. She tried to warn him, whispering in broken words, "Soldiers, near." He nodded as if he already knew. His steps grew faster, quieter. He hugged her closer, keeping her head against his chest so she would not see the dangers around them. But she could still hear the distant voices, the metallic clang of armor, the hum of weapons being charged. Her breath caught. She shut her eyes and prayed to any star that might still be listening. Finally, the sounds faded. The human slipped into a dark passage, hidden between broken walls. It led underground. He pushed aside a piece of metal and stepped into a narrow tunnel. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with eerie earth and dust. He bent low as he walked, still holding her as though he would never let her fall. The tunnel opened into a small chamber. A flickering lamp lit the space. There were blankets, cans of food, bottles of water, and tools spread neatly on the ground, a hidden shelter. The human set her down on a blanket, careful not to hurt her. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. He handed her a small bottle of water. She stared at it, uncertain. "Drink," he said. His voice was firm but not unkind. She hesitated. What if it was poisoned? What if this was a trick? But her thirst burned too strong. Slowly, she lifted the bottle to her lips and drank. The water was cool, clean. It slid down her throat and made her eyes sting with relief. When she finished, she looked at him again. He sat nearby, not too close, but close enough to watch over her. He took out a piece of dry bread and offered it. She shook her head at first, but then her stomach growled, and the hunger was too much to ignore. She took a small bite, chewing slowly. It was hard and plain, but it filled the emptiness inside her. For the first time in days, she felt a little stronger. The human said nothing. He only watched her with quiet eyes as if waiting. Silence filled the shelter, but it was not the silence of ruins and death. It was different. It was heavy, but not hopeless. The girl looked at him, trying to understand. Why was he helping her? Who was he? Her voice trembled as she asked again, "Why? Me?" This time he looked away as if the question hurt him. His hand went to a small object on the ground, a torn photograph. She caught a glimpse of it, a human woman, a small child, smiling faces. Her breath caught. She understood a little now. He had lost them, just as she had lost her family. Maybe that was why he carried her. Maybe he saw something in her that reminded him of them. She did not know if she could trust him yet. But for the first time since the war began, she felt something new, something fragile. The chamber was small, but compared to the ruined streets above, it felt like another world. The flickering lamp cast long shadows on the stone walls. The air was heavy, but safe. For the alien girl, it was the first place where she could sit without fear of collapsing in the open. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and glanced at the human. He sat on the other side of the room, leaning against the wall with his head bowed. His eyes were half closed, but she could tell he was not sleeping. He was listening, always listening. The girl's hands tightened on the blanket. She did not know what to say, or even if she should say anything. Part of her wanted to thank him. Another part of her wanted to scream. Why had he helped her? What did he expect in return? The silence pressed between them until it grew too heavy. She broke it with a soft word, her voice uncertain. You, safe here? The human opened his eyes and looked at her. For a moment he didn't answer. Then, in his rough voice, he said, safer than outside. Safer than outside. The words carried weight. She knew what outside meant. Fire, death, soldiers who killed without mercy. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Her gaze fell to the corner of the room. There were supplies, food in cans, bottles of water, tools, and weapons. Human weapons, heavy and sharp. She felt a shiver run through her. Was this man a soldier, a fighter, or just another survivor clinging to life? The girl pointed to the weapons and whispered, You fight? The human's jaw tightened. He nodded once, slowly. Then his eyes shifted to the photograph lying on the ground, the one she had seen before. The woman and child smiling in the picture. He picked it up, stared at it for a long time, and then set it back down. She did not need words to understand. He had fought to protect them, and he had lost, just like she had lost her family. Something inside her softened, just a little. The human rose and crossed the room. She tensed, gripping the blanket as if it could protect her, but he only crouched by a small metal box. He pulled out another can and opened it with a quiet scrape. The smell of food, faint but real, filled the air. He placed the can between them and pushed it toward her. She hesitated. For me? He nodded. Her stomach ached with hunger. She lifted the can and tasted the food. It was salty, strange, not like anything her people had eaten before, but it was food, real food. She swallowed quickly, afraid it might vanish if she took too long. The human watched her, not with suspicion, but with something else, something quiet. She could not name it. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and lowered her eyes. Thank you. The words were hard to say, but she forced them out. He nodded again. He did not smile, but she thought she saw a faint change in his eyes, something lighter, if only for a moment. The lamp flickered, and the sound of the world above reminded them both they were not safe forever. A distant boom shook dust from the ceiling. She jumped, clutching the blanket. The human rose at once, grabbing one of his weapons. He moved to the tunnel entrance, listening carefully. The girl's breath caught. They come? She whispered. He held up his hand, telling her to stay quiet. For long seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, the sound of armored boots on stone. Voices, rough and cruel, echoed down from above. Soldiers. Her body froze. If they found the shelter, there would be no escape. The human's face grew hard. He turned back to her and spoke one word she understood clearly. Hide. Her heart pounded. She looked around quickly. There was a narrow gap behind a pile of broken crates. She crawled inside, pulling the blanket over herself. The darkness closed around her, and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. From her hiding place, she saw the human crouched low near the tunnel entrance. His weapon was ready, but his face showed. No fear, only resolve. The boots grew louder, voices shouted, searching, metal scraped. The girl pressed her hands over her mouth, shaking. Please don't find us, please. Then silence. The boots stopped. The voices faded, moving away. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Finally, the human lowered his weapon and let out a long breath. He looked toward her hiding place and nodded once. It was safe, for now. She crawled out slowly, her body weak with relief. Her eyes burned as she whispered, They almost found. The human sat down again, wiping sweat from his forehead. Not tonight, he said, though she only understood the word not. She sat across from him, her body trembling. For the first time since she had lost everything, she was not trembling from fear alone. It was something else, the strange knowledge that this man, this human, was keeping her alive. She studied him in the lamplight. His face was tired, his clothes worn, his body scarred. He was not her enemy, he was not her people, but he was the only one who had caught her when she fell. And now, here in this hidden shelter, she felt the faintest flicker of something she thought was gone forever. The flickering lamp burned low, casting more shadow than light. The alien girl sat against the cold wall of the shelter, her blanket wrapped tightly around her thin body. Her eyes lingered on the human across the room. He was cleaning his weapon, his movements steady, almost practiced, but his face told a different story, haunted, heavy, carrying something she could not yet name. For a long time, neither spoke. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the lamp and the distant, muffled sounds of war above. At last the girl whispered, her voice trembling but curious. "Who? You?" The human looked up. His sharp eyes met hers, and for a moment she thought he would stay silent forever. Or then slowly he placed the weapon aside and touched his chest with one hand. "David," he said. His voice was low, almost hoarse. David, a human name, short, simple, but strange. On her tongue, she repeated it softly. "Vid." He gave a small nod, then he gestured to her, waiting. Her heart tightened. She had not spoken her name to anyone since the fire took her family, but something in his stare, steady, expectant, patient, pulled the word out of her. "Lyra." "Lyra," he echoed, pronouncing it carefully, as if he did not want to break it. For a moment, they were just two people in the dark, exchanging names in a ruined world. But the silence returned quickly. Lyra lowered her gaze, twisting the blanket in her hands. She wanted to ask him more, but her throat burned with fear. What if he was only helping her until she was strong enough to move? What if he planned to leave her behind? David seemed to sense her unease. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the torn photograph she had glimpsed earlier. He stared at it for a long time, his thumb brushing over the faces. Then he placed it gently on the ground between them, where she could see clearly. A woman and a child, smiling, happy, whole. Lyra's chest tightened. "Family?" she asked softly. David's jaw clenched. He nodded once. Then with great effort, he said one word. "Gone." The weight of that single word hit her like a stone. She looked at the picture again, then at his eyes. They were empty, yet burning with something she recognized too well. Loss. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Mine too." David's gaze lifted, meeting hers. For the first time she saw it, the reflection of her own pain in another being. Different worlds, different people, yet the same wound carved deep inside. Her hands shook. She clutched the blanket, trying not to cry, but the tears finally came. Hot, silent, unstoppable. She pressed her face into her hands, ashamed of her weakness. But then, she felt it. A hand. Rough, warm, resting gently on her shoulder. She froze. Slowly, she lowered her hands and looked up. David was beside her, his face unreadable, his hands steady. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The weight of that touch told her he understood. For the first time since her family's death, she did not feel completely alone. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by her quiet sobs and his steady breathing. When her tears slowed, David moved back to his side of the shelter. He did not push her to speak, but she wanted to. She needed to. In halting words, mixing her language with fragments of his, she told him. She told him about her home, about the night the soldiers came, about the fire that swallowed everything. She told him how she had run, how she had hidden, how she had lost everyone. David listened. He did not interrupt, did not look away. His eyes stayed on her, sharp and focused, as if her story mattered more than anything else in the world. When she finished, her voice was almost gone. Her chest ached, but she felt lighter, as though speaking had taken some of the weight from her shoulders. David leaned back, silent. Then, in broken words, he gave her his story. His home, attacked. His wife, his child, gone in an instant of fire and chaos. His struggle to survive in a world that no longer wanted survivors. The words were clumsy, incomplete, but the meaning was clear. Two different voices, one shared grief. The lamp flickered again, throwing his scarred face into shadow. Lyra stared at him, her fear of him slowly melting into something else. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. But before she could speak, a sound ripped through the silence. A voice. Harsh, mechanical, echoing faintly through the tunnels outside. Lyra's breath caught, her body stiffened. Soldiers. David's eyes sharpened. He grabbed his weapon and moved to the tunnel entrance, listening carefully. The voices were closer than before, searching, hunting. He turned. Back to her, his face calm but urgent. He whispered one word she understood. Quiet. Her heart hammered in her chest. She crawled back behind the crates, clutching the blanket as though it could shield her from death. The footsteps grew louder. Shadows danced on the tunnel wall. David crouched low, weapon ready, his muscles tense. Lyra pressed her hand to her mouth, praying silently. If the soldiers came into the shelter, it would be the end for both of them. The shadows grew larger, the voices echoed sharp and cruel, and then the soldiers stopped. Silence. Lyra's breath shook. David stayed still as stone, eyes locked on the tunnel. Seconds dragged into minutes. At last, the voices faded. The shadows retreated. The footsteps moved away. Lyra let out a shaky breath, her body trembling. David lowered his weapon but kept his eyes on the tunnel, waiting. Only when the silence returned did he glance back at her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, no words were needed. Both knew the truth. The past was filled with ghosts, but the danger of the present was very, very real. The shelter shook with a distant boom. Dust fell from the ceiling, making the lamp flicker wildly. Lyra's eyes widened. She pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders, her body trembling. David was already on his feet, his weapon in hand. His face was sharp, focused, no longer the quiet figure she had seen in the last hours. He moved with the speed of someone who had done this before, someone who knew what danger sounded like. From the tunnel came the sound of boots, many boots, heavy, marching in rhythm. Voices barked orders in a language Lyra could not fully understand, but the tone was clear. Search, hunt, destroy. Her chest tightened. They had found the tunnel. David looked at her, his eyes fierce. He held out his hand. Come, he said firmly. She froze, fear locking her body. Her mind screamed that running would not save them, that the soldiers were too many. But then she saw his hand, strong, steady, waiting. Something inside her pushed back against the fear. Slowly she reached out. Her small hand slid into his rough one. He pulled her to her feet. Run, he whispered. The word was simple. The meaning was everything. They moved fast, slipping into a side passage barely wide enough for two. The air was damp, filled with the smell of earth and rust. Behind them, the boots thundered closer. Lyra's feet stumbled on the uneven ground. Her legs were weak, but David did not let go. Every time she faltered, he pulled her forward, refusing to slow. The tunnel twisted and turned. Shadows danced on the walls. Lyra's breath came in sharp gasps. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. A shout echoed behind them, then a flash of light. A beam cut through the tunnel, burning into the wall where they had just been. Soldiers had seen them. Lyra cried out, but David yanked her forward. Faster! She pushed herself, her body screaming in pain. Stones scraped her bare feet, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. There were two paths ahead, both dark, both unknown. David paused only a second, listening. The shouts grew louder. Boots slammed against stone. The soldiers were close. He chose the left tunnel, pulling her inside. The air grew colder, the ground steeper. The passage slanted downward, deeper into the earth. Lyra's chest burned. Her legs shook. She wanted to collapse, but David's grip pulled her on. His hand was unyielding, his steps firm. He did not let her fall. Behind them, the soldiers fired again. The blast shook the tunnel, showering them with dirt. David spun, firing back. The sound was deafening in the narrow space. Light burst from his weapon, cutting into the dark. Shouts followed. One soldier fell, but more pressed on. He turned back to Lyra. Go! She stumbled forward, panic surging. For the first time, she wanted to scream at him, not to leave her, not to fight alone. But he was right behind her, covering her steps, driving her forward. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to crawl. Rocks tore at her hands and knees. She bit her lip, pushing through, feeling his presence just behind her. His breaths were harsh, his movements quick. Suddenly, light appeared ahead, faint, pale, but real. An exit. Lyra's eyes widened. Out! She gasped. David's grip tightened. Yes. They scrambled faster, their bodies scraping against stone. Behind them, the soldiers shouted, their voices echoing through the tunnel. Lyra burst into the open air first. The night sky stretched above, smoky but vast. Cool wind touched her face, and for a heartbeat she felt alive again. Then David pulled her fully out. He shoved a slab of broken stone into the tunnel mouth, blocking part of the passage. Not perfect, but enough to slow their hunters. Move, he barked. They ran across the ruins of the old district. Broken walls rose around them, shadows twisting in the moonlight. Lyra's legs screamed in pain, but she forced herself onward. Every step was survival. Every step mattered. Behind them, the soldiers tore through the tunnel, their shouts cutting the night. A blast struck a wall nearby, showering them with debris. David shielded her with his body, taking the brunt of the falling stone. He grunted in pain but did not stop. He kept her moving, his hand never letting go. Lyra's chest ached, but in that pain, Something burned brighter. Determination. She no longer thought of herself as a helpless survivor. Not tonight. Tonight, she would not let him down. They darted into a half-collapsed building. David led her up a broken staircase, moving quickly despite the weight of his weapon. From the top, they could see the enemy spreading through the streets below, their torches and beams cutting through the dark. Lyra gasped. So many. David's jaw tightened. He scanned the ruins, his mind working fast. He pointed toward another collapsed section, where shadows were deepest. There, she nodded, though her feet are twisted like a knife in her stomach. The soldiers below shouted again. They had seen movement. David grabbed her hand one more time, his voice fierce, commanding, yet full of something deeper. Stay with me. She met his eyes. In them she saw no doubt, no hesitation, only fire. Her breath shook, but she nodded. With you. Together they leapt down into the shadows as the chase roared on. The night pressed heavy on the ruins. Smoke drifted through the air, and every broken wall seemed to whisper danger. David and Lyra slipped through the shadows, their breaths sharp and quick. Behind them, the soldiers still hunted, their voices cutting through the silence like blades. David's hand gripped Lyra's tightly. His pace was fast, but his steps were steady, guiding her through the maze of stone and ash. Lyra tried to match him, but her legs shook with exhaustion. Every muscle in her body screamed, yet she did not let go. She would not let go. Then it happened. A blast ripped through the night. The ground shook, throwing them both off balance. David pushed Lyra aside just as the explosion tore into the wall beside them. Debris rained down, sharp and heavy. Lyra covered her head, gasping. When the dust cleared, she saw him. David lay on the ground, one arm pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and hot. His face twisted with pain, but his eyes stayed sharp. Go, he rasped, forcing himself to sit. Run! Lyra's heart stopped. No! He pushed at the ground, trying to rise, but his leg buckled. The blast had left him broken, slower. She saw the truth in his eyes. If she stayed, she would die with him. If she ran, she could live. The voices of the soldiers grew louder. Boots clattered against stone. They were close. Too close. David looked at her, his face pale but fierce. Go, he shouted again, his voice raw. He raised his weapon with his forward, a hand, aiming toward the approaching shadows. I cover. You live. Her chest tightened. She shook her head violently. I not leave. The words tumbled out, rough but desperate. No! David's jaw clenched. He tried to push her away, but she dropped to her knees beside him, gripping his arm. Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice was steady. I stay. For a moment, his expression softened. In his eyes, she saw it. The same look he had when he stared at the photograph of his family. The look of a man who had already lost too much. Lyra, he whispered. She shook her head again, fierce now. No more leave, no more alone. The soldiers' shadows stretched closer. Their voices echoed, calling, mocking. Any second now, they would be upon them. David tried to lift his weapon again, but his strength faltered. Lyra grabbed it with both hands. It was heavy, far heavier than anything she had carried before. Her arms shook under its weight, but she held it. David looked at her in shock. No. Yes, she said firmly, her voice breaking but strong. I fight. The footsteps grew louder. A beam of light swept across the rubble, nearly catching them. Lyra crouched low, the weapon trembling in her hands. Her heart thundered. She had never fired one before. She didn't know how, but she would not let him die. David's hand closed over hers, steadying her grip. His voice was low, urgent. He guided her hands, showed her where to aim. There, he said. Wait, wait. Shadows filled the edge of the street. Soldiers moved into view, their armor glinting in the smoky moonlight. Now, David whispered. Lyra pulled the trigger. The blast tore through the silence. The recoil jolted her body, nearly knocking her backward, but the shot hit true. One soldier fell, the other shouted in alarm, scattering for cover. Her breath caught. She had done it. David squeezed her shoulder. His face was pale, but pride flickered in his eyes. Good. The soldiers fired back. Sparks flew as beams struck the rubble around them. Lyra ducked, dragging David lower. Her body pressed loose to shield him. She didn't care that she was small and weak. She would not let them take him. David groaned, his wound bleeding heavily. His strength was fading fast. Leave. Me, he whispered again, weaker now. But Lyra's answer came without hesitation. Never. Something changed in her then. She was no longer the girl who had stumbled alone in the ruins, waiting to die. She was someone else someone who had made a choice. She would fight, she would protect, even if it cost her life. The soldiers regrouped, moving in with shouts. Lyra fired again, her arms trembling but her aim guided by David's fading voice. Each shot slowed the enemy, buying them seconds more. But seconds would not be enough. David's hand slid from hers, too weak to hold the weapon. His head fell back against the stone. His voice was barely a breath. Lyra, live. Her heart ached, but her eyes burned with fire. She clutched the weapon tighter, standing half-shielded in front of him. Her voice rang out, stronger than she thought possible. We live, together. The soldiers advanced, their lights cutting the dark. Lyra's finger tightened on the trigger. The night roared with fire and screams. The night was alive with fire and noise. Beams of light streaked across the ruins, burning into stone. Soldiers shouted, their armored boots pounding closer. Lyra stood in front of David, the heavy weapon trembling in her hands. Her heart raced, but her grip was steady. Behind her, David leaned against the wall, pale and bleeding, his strength fading fast. The soldiers spread out, their shadows stretching long in the smoky moonlight. One raised his weapon, another shouted an order. They were closing in. Lyra's breath caught. She thought of running, she thought of hiding, but no, her choice was made. She raised the weapon, her finger tight on the trigger. The blast thundered through the night. A deer dropped. Sparks flew as others fired back, their shots striking the stone around her. She staggered but did not fall. David's weak voice guided her. Aim, higher. She obeyed, firing again. Another soldier fell. Her arms ached, her body screamed with pain, but she held the weapon tighter. She would not stop. But there were too many. The soldiers moved in, surrounding the ruins. Their lights burned into her eyes. Her chest tightened. This is the end, she thought. We cannot win. She looked back at David. His face was pale, his eyes half closed. Yet even in his weakness, he was watching her. She saw it in his gaze, the same fire, the same refusal to surrender. Her throat tightened. She whispered, we live, together. Then the night exploded, not from her weapon, but from above. A roar filled the sky, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Bright beams cut through the smoke, slamming into the soldiers. Armor shattered, voices screamed in panic. Lyra's eyes widened, shapes moved in the dark, tall, fierce figures rushing in with weapons raised, humans, other survivors. They came like a storm, striking the soldiers with brutal force. Gunfire echoed, explosions tore through the night. The enemy broke, scattering under the sudden attack. Lyra lowered her weapon, staring in shock. She had thought they were alone, but now, out of the smoke and fire, more humans had come, fighters, survivors, carrying the same fire David carried in his eyes. One of them shouted, cover them, and fired at the soldiers who remained. Another rushed to David's side, kneeling quickly. He's hit! Get him up! Strong arms lifted David. He groaned but did not resist. His eyes opened just enough to see the other humans. Relief flickered across his face. Lyra stumbled forward, her body weak, her heart pounding. She reached for David's hand as they carried him. He squeezed her fingers faintly, his voice barely a whisper. Safe. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she believed it. The soldiers fled into the dark, their shouts fading. The ruins fell. Quiet except for the sound of fire crackling and humans calling to one another. Lyra sat beside David as the others treated his wound. Her hands shook, but she stayed close, refusing to let go of his hand. He had caught her when she had fallen. He had carried her when she could not walk, and now she would not leave him. One of the humans glanced at her, confusion in his eyes. She's not one of us, he said cautiously. Lyra's chest tightened. She feared the rejection, the same fear she had carried since the night her world burned. But David's voice, weak yet firm, cut through the air. She stays. The man hesitated, then nodded. Lyra's eyes widened, her throat ached. No one had spoken for her like that since her parents. No one had claimed her place beside them. She whispered his name, her voice soft but full of meaning. David. His eyes opened again, and for a moment he looked at her not as a stranger, not as an alien, but as something more. The other humans gathered around, preparing to move. We can't stay here, one said. Too dangerous. We head east. Lyra looked at the smoking ruins, at the place where she had been ready to die. Then she looked at David, alive beside her, his hand still holding hers even in weakness. Her chest swelled with something she had not felt in so long. Hope. She rose, still holding his hand, and stood tall despite her trembling legs. For the first time, she was not lost. She was not alone. Together, they followed the survivors into the night. The stars were faint, hidden by smoke, but she could see them. And as she walked beside David, she knew the truth. She had lost everything, her family, her people, her home. But she had found something new, Someone who refused to let her fall. Someone who had pulled her into his arms when she had no one left, and that was enough.